They didn't whisper it. They threw it like a plate at a wall. Useless. The word hit me first in the kitchen, where the kettle was just beginning to murmur, and the morning light fell in a thin, polite square on the floor. I had my hands in the sink, peeling the paper label from a jar so we could reuse it. Habits from years, when every lira, every coin, every crumb mattered. When my daughter-in-law Lena walked past without looking and said it again, louder, like she was testing how far it could travel. Useless. It sounded like a lid snapped onto a container, sealing me in. I turned off the kettle and felt that tiny silence after a click, the kind that makes the whole room listen for what comes next. My name is Mary. I'm 74, and the bones in my hands remember the weight of crates, sewing machines, and sleeping children. I left my village when I was 19 with a suitcase full of winter socks, married a man who promised me we'd build something together, then raised a son who promised me I'd never be alone. For him, for Mark, I stood in bakery lines before dawn and wiped his fever with cold cloths at midnight. I scrubbed school shirts and ironed them until the collars looked like they could stand by themselves. When my husband fell sick, I carried our life like a tray, held high in a crowded room, trying not to spill. I sold my wedding bangles to keep the medicine coming and the house warm. When I grow up, Mark used to say, his cheeks flushed with some small victory, I'll bring you back everything you gave me. He would touch my hand and hold it longer than necessary. Children believe time is a generous friend. Now time lives in my joints. The hallway smells of onions and detergent. The clock in the living room coughs out its steady little ticks. Lena moves through the house like a queen who has forgotten how she got the crown. She is neat, brisk, always wiping something. I don't dislike her. Dislike is a luxury. But her love is a locked drawer I never got a key to. She calls this house Mark's place, though my hands know every drawer that sticks and every window that sighs when you close it. When I say our home, they tilt their heads like I have said something grammatically incorrect. Mom, we talked about this, Mark said last week when I asked if I could keep the spare bedroom for my sewing things. We need space. Sophie's growing. Sophie is my granddaughter, 8 years old, with hair that refuses to stay in any plate I make. I taught her to whistle with 2 fingers and a brave heart. She'll come to me when her parents' words are too sharp. Grandma, can I show you my picture, she says, and then whispers, don't tell Mom that I used your thread. The day she called me useless, Lena had found my needle tin on the table and a few crumbs of thread on the floor. Sophie stepped on a needle, she said, as if I had thrown it like a dart. You can't keep your old woman mess everywhere. It's not helpful. It's useless. I still don't know if she said I was useless or my hands were. The word stuck either way. After breakfast, I took the bus to the market, carrying the cloth bag with the faded cherries on it. Wind slipped under my scarf, and I thought of the winter Mark had pneumonia, and our landlord pounded on the door for rent. I pawned my mother's silver hair combs. The man behind the counter tilted them in the light like fish scales. I'll bring them back for you, Mark said at 12. All certainty, all sunshine. He never did, but I kept the place they had made in my drawer, like an altar to promises. At the market, I bought carrots with their green tops still on, parsley that made the whole bag smell like a garden, and a small loaf still warm at the bottom. The bread heat against my palm felt like a little heart. On the way home, the bus braked too hard, and I had to reach for the rail. A young man stood to offer his seat and called me Auntie, kindly, like a soft blanket. I wanted to cry at that one word, the respect inside it. Back at the house, I took the long way around so I could pass the window where my geraniums crowd shoulder to shoulder. They've been there longer than Lena has. Red, stubborn, cheerful even in winter. I thought, not for the first time, that if plants had voices, they might ask me for the stories I've never told. The day I first held Mark and he stopped crying because my heartbeat matched the one he'd known inside me. The night the electricity went out and we sang so the dark couldn't make its own music. Inside, the television talked to itself. I set the bag on the counter and started trimming the parsley. "You don't have to cook, Mom," Mark called from the living room, not unkindly, just absent. "We already ordered." He said it like a polite cancellation, as if my hands were a service he no longer needed. I kept chopping. The rhythm was a language I trusted. "We'll clean up," Lena added, and I could hear the smile she saves for guests, but uses on me like a napkin. Carefully, briefly, then folds it away. I tell myself I am not proud. I tell myself I am practical. But there are places inside me where I still keep inventory. Debts paid, favors given, nights kept awake so others could sleep. When Mark and Lena were struggling with their first apartment, mold on the bathroom ceiling, a landlord who locked the mailbox when they were late. I took my pension and a small insurance payment after my husband died, and I helped with the down payment on this house. "We'll put your name on the deed," Mark said, rubbing the back of his neck the way he does when he's embarrassed by kindness. I didn't need my name. I needed the sound of family. The notary office smelled of old paper and lemon cleaner. I signed where they pointed. The pages turned like a hymn book. I left everything behind, my village, my jewelry, half my savings, for my children. Because that's what love does. It moves out of the center and makes a ring of warmth around someone else's life. That evening, Sophie came with her school bag bouncing against her knees. "Grandma, guess what? I'm the son in the class play." She twirled, arms out, nearly clipping the vase I keep for tulips when they're cheap. "Careful," Lena snapped, and then softer. "Go show your dad." When Sophie ran off, Lena turned to me, her face careful as a shut window. "Mark and I talked," she said. "The way doctors say, you'll feel a little pinch. We think it's best if you spend a few weeks with Aunt Rose. She has more space, and you know the stairs here." She gestured at my knees like they were two broken hinges. My mouth filled with parsley taste. My tongue couldn't find any words that weren't bitter. "A few weeks," I said, though what I heard was a door closing softly and firmly. That night I folded my sweaters so they would not judge me for leaving, tucked my rosary in the side pocket, and put the photo of my husband, his proud, shy smile, between two blouses so the glass wouldn't crack. I moved slowly, not because I am slow, but because every object in a home has a small thread tied to the days it has seen. You loosen those threads, and your life sways a little. The box with my papers I kept for last. Birth certificate, marriage license, the bundle of receipts from the notary, tied with string. I opened the lid and stared. The string lay there, neatly cut. The folder with the house papers, photocopies, stamped and signed, was not on top where it always lives like a sleeping cat. I emptied the box, the sound of paper like rain on a roof. Nothing. I sat very still, as if movement might scare the truth away. In the living room, Mark laughed at something on the television. The sound came to me through the door like a memory of childhood, his little boy giggle, then grew into the laugh of a man who believes everything will arrange itself because someone else is arranging it. My fingers went cold. I remembered the notary office, the pen, the stamp, the way Mark had tucked the original deed into his folder and told me, "I'll keep this safe, Mom. Don't worry." I hadn't worried. Worry is for people who think they have any power in the matter. Mothers don't worry. We prepare. I put the empty box on the bed and went to the kitchen. Lena was wiping the counter, her movements so precise it made crumbs ashamed to exist. "Lena," I said, and my voice sounded like a squeak from an old hinge. "Where are my papers? The copies from the deed?" She didn't look up. "Oh, Mark has all that. It's simpler." Simpler. The word slid under the door like a draft. "May I have them?" I asked, each syllable stitched with the neatest thread I could find. She paused, then finally met my eyes. "Mary, don't make this complicated. We're taking care of things. You don't have to involve myself in my own life." I felt a small, careful anger uncurl inside me, like a fern opening in spring. Not a storm. Storms pass and leave everything sodden, but a steady light, the kind that finds lost pins in a dark carpet. "I would like to see my papers," I said. "Please." The word landed between us like a folded handkerchief. She shrugged, a tiny rise of her shoulders. "Ask Mark." So I went to the living room. "Mark," I said, and he muted the television, finally looking at me with his warm, distracted eyes. "Do you have the copies from the deed? I need to put them back in my box." He frowned. "Mom, it's all digital now. I scanned everything. I'll send you a photo." I thought of the empty box, the cut string. "I'd like the papers," I repeated, "in my hand." Sophie ran back in with orange construction paper around her face like a sun and kissed my cheek. Her lips were warm and smelled faintly of toothpaste and crayons. "You're my light," I whispered into her hair, and then I stood up straighter than my back prefers. Mark glanced at Lena. It was the look of partners who have already discussed a subject to death. "We changed a few things," he said, not meeting my eyes now, "to make it easier if anything happens to you. You know, for the mortgage and taxes. It's better this way." Something inside me went very quiet, like a pond when the wind dies. I didn't shout. Shouting would have given them a storm they could call unreasonable. I put my hand on the arm of the chair to steady the tremble that wanted to show itself, and I asked, as gently as if I were tucking a child in, "What did you change?" Mark's jaw worked. Lena answered for him, a fraction too quickly. "Nothing you need to worry about." The kettle clicked in the kitchen, the sound of water that has finally decided to boil, and a breath later I heard from the hallway the soft, unmistakable slide of the chain on the front door being set for the night. I had never heard it from this side before. The night after I found my box empty, I hardly slept. The house creaked the way old houses do, but every sound felt like an intruder inside my ribs. I lay on my side, knees curled toward my chest, staring at the dim square of the window where the streetlight painted a faint orange glow. I kept hearing Mark's voice repeating, "It's better this way." Better for whom? Certainly not for me, the woman who had bent her back and broken her bones so he could stand taller. I pressed my hands together, the way I used to when he was a boy sick with fever, whispering, "Please, God, let him live." Now the prayer was different. "Please, God, let me not vanish." Morning came, and with it the smell of coffee and buttered toast. I rose slowly, feeling each joint resist the idea of standing. My suitcase sat like an accusation in the corner of the room, half-zipped, sweaters folded inside like bodies waiting for burial. I touched the handle, then pulled my hand away. Not yet. The air outside the bedroom was already busy, Lena giving orders, Sophie humming. I entered the kitchen quietly, but Lena's eyes were sharp, her smile rehearsed. "Morning, Mary," she said. It was the kind of greeting one gives a neighbor, not a mother-in-law who had given up everything. Mark glanced up from his phone. "Mom, did you sleep?" he asked, and before I could answer, he turned back to the screen. I sat, folded my hands, and looked at Sophie. Her face was bright, milk mustache on her lip. "Grandma, when you come to Aunt Rose's, can I still call you every night?" she asked. The innocence in her voice pierced me deeper than Lena's coldness. I nodded, my throat tight. "Every night, my son," I whispered. Lena set a plate in front of me, 2 thin slices of bread, no butter. Not cruel, just careless, as if care had become too expensive to spare. My chest ached, not from hunger, but from being treated like a ghost that had overstayed its welcome. Later that day, I went to the market again. The air was damp with yesterday's rain. I carried coins wrapped in a handkerchief, the way I always have. Each coin seemed heavier than its worth. On the way back, I stopped at the church on the corner. The door was open, the pews empty. I sat in the 3rd row, where the light fell softly on the worn wood. My fingers traced the grooves left by decades of hands folded in prayer. I whispered into the silence, "Am I really useless?" My voice trembled, but the echo did not. For a moment, I felt the presence of my husband beside me, the faint memory of his calloused hand closing over mine. He would have told me, "Mary, you are the root, not the leaf. Leaves fall, but roots endure." When I returned, the front door was locked. I knocked softly, then harder. Finally, Sophie opened it, giggling. "Grandma, I had to reach high for the chain," she said proudly. Behind her, Lena's voice called out, "Sophie, don't play with the lock." But I had already seen it. The chain was no longer just for night. It was their way of reminding me. This was not my house anymore. My heart thudded painfully as I stepped inside. I wanted to scream, to demand, "Where are my papers? Where is my place?" But instead, I kissed Sophie's head and carried the bag of carrots to the kitchen. That evening, I asked Mark again. We were alone this time, the television buzzing low. "Mark," I said softly, "I need the papers, not a photo, not a scan, the real copies." He sighed heavily, rubbed his temples. "Mom, you don't understand. The house is under my name now. It's safer this way. Banks, taxes, everything simpler. If anything happens to you—" I cut him off, my voice firmer than I expected. "And what if something happens to you, Mark? Who will remember that it was me who built the foundation of this life?" He looked away, ashamed, but didn't answer. The silence between us was thick, a wall that even my love couldn't climb. I went to bed early, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I began to plan. Not revenge. Revenge is a young person's fire. I thought of justice, of truth. Somewhere in some office, there had to be records with my name on them, proof that I was not just a guest here. My fingers itched to hold a pen, to sign my name again, as if reclaiming myself. I remembered the notary's lemon-scented office, the paperweight that looked like a glass heart. If they thought I would quietly fade, they had forgotten who I was. A woman who raised a son through sickness and poverty does not surrender easily. The next morning, I told Sophie I was going out early. She hugged me tightly, her small arms fierce. "Don't be long, Grandma," she said. I kissed her forehead. "I'll always come back to you." Then I stepped out into the crisp air, clutching my worn handbag with the empty box papers inside. My destination was clear, the notary office. Somewhere in their archives was the truth, waiting like a buried seed. And as I walked, cane tapping the pavement, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a quiet strength rising, slow and steady, like dawn breaking after a long, cruel night. The notary office was across town, in the same gray building where I had once signed away my savings with trembling but hopeful hands. That morning, the sky was the color of unwashed wool, and the bus was crowded with young men holding their phones like lanterns. I sat by the window, clutching my handbag as if it contained treasure. In truth, it held only my empty paper box and a rosary. But to me, it was heavier than gold. My heart thudded with each stop the bus made, every corner bringing me closer to the place where I might find proof that I still mattered. When I walked through the office door, the familiar scent of old paper and disinfectant hit me like a memory. The walls were lined with wooden panels scratched by decades of pens and shoes. Behind the counter, a young woman with a ponytail and tired eyes looked up. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite but detached. I cleared my throat. "I need copies of a deed. My son and I signed them here a few years ago. I was a co-signer." My voice quivered only slightly, but I steadied it with the kind of calm a mother learns in nights of fever. She tapped on her keyboard. "Name?" I gave it. She asked for my husband's name, then my son's. Her fingers danced on the keys. The screen glowed. And finally she frowned. "The deed shows under Mark Thompson only, no secondary name listed." My stomach lurched as though the floor had tilted. "That can't be right," I whispered. "I signed. I remember the lemon smell, the stamp, the pen." She looked at me with something between pity and annoyance. "Sometimes arrangements change. If you weren't registered as co-owner, it may have been updated." Updated. The word hit me harder than useless. It meant erased. I felt heat climb my face, but I didn't shout. Instead, I leaned closer. "Is there any archive? Any record that shows my signature?" She hesitated, then pointed me toward an office at the end of the hall. "You can check the archives, but it may take time." I thanked her, my voice tight, and walked toward the door. The archive room smelled of dust and tiredness. Metal shelves stood like sentries stacked with folders, some so old the labels had faded into blankness. An older clerk sat behind a desk, glasses perched on the tip of his nose. "Yes?" he asked. "I'm looking for deed papers from 3 years ago. House on Willow Street, signed by Mark Thompson." "My name is Mary Thompson." He squinted, flipped through a ledger, then motioned for me to wait. He disappeared into the shelves, his shoes whispering on the concrete floor. Minutes stretched like hours. My palms dampened. Finally, he returned with a folder, thick with copies. "This is what we have." I opened it with trembling hands. There was Mark's name, bold and clear. There was Lena's name, added later in tidy type, but my name was absent. I turned pages, searching, frantic. Then, on one yellowed photocopy, I saw it. My signature, slanted, a little shaky, but mine, dated, stamped, proof. My throat tightened with relief and fury. This is me," I said, pointing. The clerk nodded indifferently. "It's an old draft, maybe not finalized." He shrugged. Happens, as if years of sacrifice could be brushed away like dust from a shelf. I pressed the page against my chest. "Can I have a copy?" I asked. He sighed, then went to the machine. The hum of the copier was the sweetest music I had heard in months. When he handed me the fresh paper, warm and smelling faintly of ink, I felt like I was holding my life in my hands. I slipped it into my handbag, pressing it flat against my heart. As I left, I passed the young woman again. She looked up, curious. For a moment, I wanted to tell her everything. That a woman can give up her youth, her savings, her dreams, and still be erased. But I only nodded, too tired to carry more than the paper in my bag. Outside, the air had shifted. The clouds were thinning, the light breaking through. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp taste of cold. On the bus home, I watched couples talk. Children tug at sleeves, and I thought, I am not useless. I am not erased. This paper is my proof. But proof means nothing if no one sees it. My son, my own son, had let this happen. He had taken my trust and folded it neatly into his pocket, alongside his mortgage and his wife's sharp smile. When I reached the house, Sophie ran to me, arms flung wide. "Grandma, did you bring me anything?" I pulled a small wrapped candy from my bag, one I had saved from the market, and placed it in her hand. Her joy filled the room like sunshine. Lena glanced at me, suspicious, then turned away. Mark was in the living room, his tie loosened, his eyes tired. I walked straight to him, my cane tapping firmly on the floor. "Mark," I said, pulling the paper from my bag. My hands did not tremble. "Explain this." I placed the copy on the table in front of him. His eyes widened, his lips parted. For the first time in years, he looked like the boy who had once promised to take care of me. Lena stepped closer, her face tightening. "Where did you get that?" she demanded. I ignored her. My eyes were only on my son. "You swore I would never be alone. You swore, Mark. Was that a lie?" The room went silent. Sophie clutched her candy, looking from face to face, sensing the storm. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it. His silence was an answer more painful than any word. I stood tall, taller than my bones wanted me to, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the fire of a woman who would not be erased. Mark's silence spread across the room like spilled ink. He stared at the paper on the table as if it were a ghost rising from the past. I watched his throat move, his Adam's apple bobbing, as he tried to swallow words that refused to come. Sophie, sweet Sophie, shifted nervously, her candy wrapper crackling in her small hands. "Grandma?" she whispered. Her voice was a question, a lifeline. I touched her shoulder gently, steadying her trembling little world, while mine was already shaking apart. Lena was the first to break the silence. Her heels clicked against the floor as she stepped closer, her arms crossed like a gate. "Mary," she said, her voice smooth but sharp, "you shouldn't be stirring up things you don't understand. That paper is outdated. It doesn't mean anything." She snatched at it, but I was faster, pressing my palm firmly over the page. Her eyes flashed, not expecting me to resist. "It means everything," I said, my voice low, steady, and edged with the steel I had hidden for decades. "This is my name, my signature, my life." Mark finally exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, please. Lena's right. It's complicated. Lawyers, banks, things change. We had to adjust the ownership so it wouldn't cause problems later. It doesn't mean we don't care about you." He said it so easily, as though love could survive without truth. My chest tightened. I remembered nights sewing by candlelight to buy him his first school shoes, the way he once held my hand on his first day at university. And now here he was, explaining away my erasure as if it were bookkeeping. "Complicated?" I repeated. "No, Mark. Raising you alone after your father died was complicated. Paying bills with coins and prayers was complicated. But my name, My place in this house is not complicated. It is simple. It is mine. My voice cracked, but I did not waver. Sophie looked up at me with wide, wet eyes, and I saw myself reflected in her gaze, not as useless, not as erased, but as someone still standing. Lena's lips pressed thin. "We've carried you long enough," she said coldly. "This is our home now. You should be grateful we've kept you here as long as we have." The words landed like stones on my chest. Kept me, as though I were a stray dog taken in out of pity. I straightened my back despite the ache in my spine. "Kept me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I built this. I sold everything I had to make this roof possible. You cook your meals in a kitchen I paid for, sleep in a bed bought with my sacrifices, and dare to tell me I should be grateful?" Mark stood quickly, his chair scraping the floor. "Enough," he shouted, his face flushed. Sophie flinched and dropped her candy. The silence after his voice echoed like broken glass. I looked at him, my son, my flesh and blood, and I barely recognized the man standing before me. He wasn't the boy who once clung to my skirts when thunder scared him. He wasn't the young man who kissed my forehead after graduation and said, "I'll make you proud, Mom." He was a stranger with my son's eyes, hardened by Lena's whispers and softened by convenience. I gathered the paper from the table, folded it neatly, and slipped it back into my bag. "You may erase my name from the deed," I said quietly, "but you will not erase me from the truth. I was here before you, Lena. I will remain after you. Houses are built of bricks, but homes are built of sacrifices, and this home is soaked with mine." My voice quivered, but not from fear. This time it was from the fire rising in me. That night I lay awake again, but not in despair. I traced the paper with my fingertips in the dark. It was thin, fragile, but it carried weight heavier than steel. In my mind, I replayed every small betrayal, the quiet dismissal, the mocking smiles, the slammed doors, and beneath them I felt a pulse, steady and strong, a seed of defiance. The next morning I dressed slowly, carefully, a dark skirt, my best blouse, the scarf my husband once bought me from the bazaar when we were young. I looked at myself in the mirror, wrinkles, gray hair, tired eyes, but also resilience, a face carved by storms, but not destroyed. Sophie knocked softly. "Grandma, are you going somewhere?" she asked. I kissed her forehead. "Yes, my son, I'm going to remind them who I am." I left the house before Lena's sharp eyes could follow me. The bus ride was quiet, filled with the hum of strangers' lives. My destination was clear, a lawyer's office recommended long ago by an old friend. I carried the paper in my bag like a shield. The receptionist smiled politely as I explained, though her eyes flickered with curiosity at the story spilling from my mouth. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with gentle eyes and ink-stained fingers, listened patiently. When I showed him the copy, he leaned forward. "This is significant," he said. "If you signed once, even if they filed differently later, we can challenge, especially if your contribution is documented." Contribution. The word felt like a balm. For years I had been told I was a burden. Here was someone telling me I had contributed, something solid, something real. I told him about the down payment, about the insurance money, about the receipts I had saved like holy relics. His nods grew firmer with each word. "You have a case, Mrs. Thompson," he said finally. "It won't be easy, but it is possible. Possible." The word filled my lungs with hope, like fresh air after a storm. I walked out of the office taller than I had walked in. The street noise sounded like music. For the first time in years, I felt like I had stepped back into my own story, not as a side character in Mark and Lena's tale, but as the author of my own. When I returned home, Lena was waiting at the door, arms crossed, eyes suspicious. "Where were you?" she demanded. I smiled faintly. I was reminding myself that I am not useless. I brushed past her, my cane tapping the floor like a drumbeat of defiance. In the living room, Mark looked up, uneasy, sensing a storm he could no longer control. I placed my handbag gently on the table, my eyes never leaving his. "You've forgotten who I am, Mark," I said softly, "but I am about to remind you." The morning after my visit to the lawyer, the house felt different. It wasn't the walls or the air. It was me. I carried myself with a quiet certainty, like a tree that had finally felt its roots deep in the earth again. Lena sensed it first. Her eyes followed me as I moved about the kitchen, suspicious, narrowing when she saw the faint smile I couldn't quite hide. She didn't know what I had done yet, but she knew enough to be afraid of it. Mark came down the stairs, tie crooked, phone in hand. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, barely looking up. But when he saw Lena's stiff posture, he glanced between us. "Everything all right?" he asked. Lena's lips tightened. "Your mother has been busy." The word busy dropped heavy between them, like a stone into still water. I set Sophie's breakfast plate in front of her and stroked her hair. "Grandma made you your favorite, honey toast." She smiled brightly, her innocence alight in the gloom. I turned to Mark then, my eyes steady. "Yes, I've been busy. I remembered something yesterday. My name, Mark. My signature. Do you remember that day at the notary?" His hand froze on his phone. His silence was answer enough. Lena slammed a cupboard door. "We've talked about this already. It's settled." Her voice cracked with something, fear perhaps, or anger that her control was slipping. I leaned on my cane and faced her fully. "No, Lena, it is not settled. You can erase my name from a paper, but you cannot erase what I gave. Every penny, every sleepless night, every sacrifice. I am the foundation of this house, and foundations don't crumble because someone decides to paint over them." Mark muttered, "Mom, please, don't start again. It's not good for anyone." I laughed then, not bitter, but hollow, the laugh of someone who has seen too much to be fooled. Not good for anyone, or not good for you? His eyes dropped to the floor. That afternoon, when Mark was at work and Sophie at school, I overheard Lena on the phone. Her voice was sharp, urgent. "No, she found something. Yes, a copy. I don't know how. But if she takes it further, it could complicate everything. We can't let her." She paused, listening, then hissed, "Don't worry. I'll handle her." Her words slithered through me like cold water. Handle me, as though I were a problem to be solved, not a woman who had carried this family on her back. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with fury. I stepped back into my room quietly, clutching my rosary until the beads left marks in my palm. That evening, Mark returned home, his face drawn. Lena pulled him into the kitchen. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Lawyer, papers, she won't stop. When they came back out, their faces were united, two fronts of the same battle. Mark tried to sound calm. "Mom, we need to talk. We think it's best if you take a little break. Maybe go to Aunt Rose's for a while." I set my teacup down gently, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "A break?" I repeated. "You mean exile?" Lena's smile was thin as a blade. It will be easier for everyone. I stood then, straightening with every ounce of strength my body still carried. For everyone, or just for you? You want me out so you can bury the truth. But I won't go. This is my home. These are my walls. My husband's laughter is still in the corners. My tears are in the floorboards. You may lock the door, change the papers, twist my son's mind, but you cannot erase me. Sophie, sitting cross-legged with her crayons, looked up, her little voice trembling. "Grandma, are you leaving?" Her eyes filled with tears. My heart nearly broke, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "No, my son, Grandma is not leaving, not this time." That night I barely slept again, but not from despair. I planned. I laid out every receipt, every faded photo, every scrap of evidence I had kept, even when others told me to throw away the past. I was building a shield of memory, one they could not pierce. The next day, Lena cornered me in the hallway. Her voice was a hiss, low enough so Sophie wouldn't hear. "If you bring lawyers into this, Mary, you'll regret it. You think Mark will choose you over me, over his family? He won't. He belongs to me now." I met her gaze, unblinking. "He may belong to you, but the truth belongs to me." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, and I saw fear hiding in their depths. The house grew tense after that, every meal a silent battlefield. Mark avoided my eyes. Lena's smiles turned brittle, and Sophie clung to me more than ever. She slipped me notes in her childish handwriting. "Don't be sad, Grandma. You are my hero." I kept them folded in my pocket, armor against despair. One evening, as the sun dipped and painted the walls with orange light, I gathered my strength and spoke clearly, so both Mark and Lena could hear. "I have spoken to a lawyer. I have my papers. If you try to push me out, I will fight, not with fists, not with shouting, but with the truth and with the law. I am not useless. I am not erased, and you will see that." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Mark's face paled. Lena's jaw tightened. Sophie slipped her small hand into mine under the table, her eyes wide but shining with pride. For the first time in years, I felt not like a shadow, but like a flame. And flames, once lit, do not easily go out. That night, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Even the clock in the living room seemed to tick more cautiously, afraid to interrupt the tension. I sat by my window, looking out at the dim glow of the street lamp, the paper from the notary folded carefully in my lap. Every now and then, I touched it with my fingertips, reminding myself it was real. Proof. Not just of ink and signature, but of my existence. I thought of my husband then, his voice, his hands, the way he used to say, "Mary, a tree bends in the wind, but it doesn't break." For years I had bent, to Mark's needs, to Lena's sharp tongue, to the silence that grew around me like ivy. But now I felt the trunk inside me stiffen, the roots deepen. I would not break. The next morning the tension cracked. Lena was on the phone again, pacing the kitchen, her words sharp as knives. "Yes, I told you it's not enough. If she goes to court, they'll dig up everything. We can't risk it. She has to leave. The sooner, the better." I froze in the hallway, my heart thudding. Who was she speaking to? A lawyer? A relative? Or someone darker? Someone who could make problems disappear? When she ended the call, I stepped into the kitchen deliberately, cane tapping the tile. She turned, startled. "Who was that?" I asked. Her smile was too quick, too false. Just a friend. I held her gaze, steady and unflinching. A friend who wants me gone? For a moment, her face hardened, the mask slipping. You should be careful, Mary. Old women who stir up trouble often find themselves very lonely. The words chilled me more than winter air, but instead of shrinking, I straightened. I have been lonely for years, Lena. That is not new. What is new is that I have the truth, and I am not afraid anymore. I left her standing there, her lips pressed into a thin line. Later that day, Mark tried to soften the edges. He sat beside me in the living room, his voice lower, almost pleading. Mom, why are you doing this? You know I love you. But this will tear us apart. I looked at him, at the boy I once carried on my hip, the man he had become. Mark, I said gently, it was not me who started this. I gave everything for you, for this home, for your future. And now I am told I am useless, that I do not belong. Tell me, whose fault is it that we are torn apart? He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to answer. That night, Sophie crawled into my lap, clutching her pillow. Grandma, she whispered, Mom says you're making things difficult, but I don't think you are. You make things better. I kissed her forehead, tears burning in my eyes. You're my little son, I whispered, and even when clouds hide the light, the sun is still there. She smiled, and in that moment, I knew I was fighting not just for me, but for her, for the truth she deserved to grow up with. The following morning, I gathered my receipts, the bank slips, the crumpled notes from years of payments. I placed them neatly into a folder, tying it with string. Each piece of paper was a brick in the wall of my defense. When I carried the folder to the lawyer, he looked through them carefully, nodding. This strengthens your case, he said. It shows contribution, intention, history. If they try to push you out, we can fight it. His words were calm, professional, but to me, they sounded like victory. But victories are never welcomed by those who thrive on shadows. That evening, when I returned, I found my room disturbed. Drawers half open, my box overturned. My papers, the ones I hadn't taken to the lawyer, were scattered, some missing. My heart pounded as I searched frantically. The small letters from my husband, the pawn shop receipt for my wedding bangles, the photo of me holding Mark as a baby, all gone. Panic clawed at my chest. I confronted Lena immediately. She shrugged, feigning ignorance. Maybe you misplaced them. You're forgetful, Mary. Her smile was venom disguised as sweetness. Mark walked in mid-confrontation. What's going on? He asked. Your mother's accusing me again. I turned to him, fury and desperation in my eyes. Mark, they were here. Now they're gone. Do you think I'd imagine this? He hesitated, torn. His silence was more painful than denial. That night I cried, not out of weakness, but out of grief for all the years I had let my trust blind me. But through the tears, I felt something else rising. Resolve. They could steal my papers, twist my son's loyalty, even tarnish my name. But they could not steal the truth itself. I still had my copy from the notary, and now I had a lawyer who believed me. The next day, I told Mark directly, my voice sharper than it had been in years. I will not leave. If you try to force me, you will face the law. And if you stand against me, you will have to look your daughter in the eyes one day and explain why you betrayed your own mother. His face crumpled, guilt shadowing his features. Lena grabbed his arm, pulling him back, but I had already seen it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the crack in her control. That evening, while Lena banged dishes in the kitchen, Sophie crept to my room and whispered, "Grandma, I heard Mom and Dad. They're scared. They said if you go to court, people will know everything." I knelt beside her, holding her small hands. "Then maybe, my son, it is time people know." The storm was no longer just inside me. It was in the house, pressing against every wall, waiting to break. And I, Mary, once silent, once bent, was ready to let it roar. The storm announced itself with a knock I did not expect. It was late morning. The kettle had just sighed, and the house smelled of toasted bread and lemon cleaner. I was slicing apples for Sophie's snack when the doorbell rang, twice, quick and businesslike. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it to find a man and a woman in neat jackets, smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, clipboards in hand. "Good day," the woman said. "We're here about the viewing." For a heartbeat, I thought I had misheard. "Viewing?" I repeated. She checked her page. "Yes, the property listing. Wednesday at 11. Mark Thompson confirmed. We're a little early to take measurements." Behind them, a car idled with a magnetic sign on the door, Haven Realty. My breath went shallow. Their eyes slid past me into the hallway like birds searching for a place to land. I did not move. "There is no viewing," I said, finding a steadiness I didn't feel. "This home is not for sale." The man's smile tightened. "I'm afraid the owner has requested it." The word owner struck me harder than any insult. I stood wider in the doorway, small as I am, and filled the space. "The child is at school, the father is at work, and the mother-in-law is not a doormat," I said softly. "There is no viewing." The woman shifted, uncomfortable. The man started to protest, then met my eyes and thought better of it. "We'll confirm with our client," he said. They retreated, their shoes tapping a nervous rhythm down the steps. I closed the door and slid the chain across with a click that sounded, for once, like protection. My hands trembled so hard, the apple knife quivered against the board. A listing meant photos, signatures, plans made behind my back in rooms I couldn't enter. I went to my room and pulled my handbag from the wardrobe, the notary copy still warm in my imagination, the lawyer's words humming like a low drum, "You have a case." When I returned to the kitchen, Lena was there, keys in hand, perfume sharp like citrus over metal. She saw my face and froze. "What now?" she said, feigning impatience and missing the fear in her own voice. "Realtors," I replied. "They came for the viewing." For a blink her mask slipped and I glimpsed the bare wire of her plan. Then she laughed too loudly. "Probably a mistake." "Was it a mistake when my papers disappeared?" I asked. "Was it a mistake when the deed was updated? Or when the chain began to live on the door?" I stepped closer, cane tip ticking the tile. "You can sell a house like you sell a coat, Lena, but a home doesn't go quietly from a mother's hands." Her stare hardened. "You think Mark won't sign? You think he'll choose memory over a clean solution? He's practical. He has a daughter. He belongs to the future." "And you," I said, "belong to rooms where doors lock from your side." She tried to push past me. I let her shoulder brush mine so she would feel how solid I still was. After she left, I sat at the table and wrote on a scrap of paper in careful letters the way I used to label Mark's school books. "Call the lawyer. Register caution. No entry without consent." I pinned it to the corkboard, where no one in this house looks, because no one in this house asks me anything. Then I took out Sophie's little notes, "You are my hero," and tucked them inside my blouse like a medal I had earned. By noon, the phone calls began. I could hear them even when doors were closed. the hiss of plot behind plaster, the rustle of betrayal. "Yes, we can proceed without her," Lena whispered to someone. "She's old, she gets confused. We'll say it's unsafe. Yes, the stairs." I pictured papers shuffling, boxes being ticked by people who would never meet my hands, never know the shape of my sacrifices. I called the lawyer. "They tried to show the house," I said. He didn't sound surprised. "We'll file an urgent notice with the registry," he replied. "It's essentially a flag. No transfer without addressing your claim. And Mary, from this point, keep a record of everything. Times, names, what is said. Truth has legs when it's written." After we hung up, I took down an old school notebook of Mark's from the closet, the one with the frayed blue cover and 2 pages of multiplication in his crooked boy handwriting, and began to write. Wednesday, 11:07. Haven Realty. Viewing attempted. I refused entry. Lena returned at 11:25. Denial. The axe steadied me. Words became bricks. With each line, I built a small wall against the flood. At 3, Sophie burst through the door with her backpack bouncing and her hair like a halo of wires. "Grandma, we painted planets. I'm Saturn, look." She twirled, arms out, and the paper ring she wore around her waist scattered glitter onto the rug. I gathered her close, breathing in school glue and soap and that sweet child smell the world has not yet managed to scrub away. "Saturn is beautiful," I said, my voice catching. "It wears its hardship as rings." She giggled, then looked up, serious suddenly. "Are you leaving?" I smoothed the paper ring where it had creased. "No, my son, I am circling, not leaving." We were setting the table when Mark came home early, face tight, tie loosened. He didn't kiss Sophie's head the way he usually does. He went straight to the kitchen, lowered his voice, and asked Lena, "Why did you schedule them now?" Her answer was a knife wrapped in silk. "Because she's not listening. You keep saying later, but later always becomes never. We can't live under her eyes forever." He rubbed his temples. "You think I don't know that? But there are legal complications." She scoffed. "Complications are just people who refuse to sign. Make her sign." I stepped into the doorway so they would see me seeing them. Mark flinched. Lena held his gaze. I moved to the sink and washed an apple that was already clean, just to quiet my hands. "Realtors were turned away," I said into the running water, as if I were mentioning rain. "I've spoken to counsel." The word counsel made Lena's mouth pinch. It is hard to bully a woman who has a name and a number she can call. Mark's shoulders fell. "Mom, what do you want?" The apple spun in my palm. "I want what I gave to be acknowledged. I want a place that isn't conditional on your wife's mood. I want to be seen as more than a shadow that cleans plates." Dinner was a battlefield wrapped in napkins. We ate in a silence broken only by Sophie's attempts at sunshine. "In the play, I arrive in the second scene," she announced, as if she could remind us there were scenes and acts and that the story could yet be saved. When she left to brush her teeth, I placed the notary copy in the center of the table like bread. "This isn't a ghost," I said. "It's me. Whatever you have updated was built on top of my name like someone roofing over a skylight. You can make it darker inside, but the sky is still there." Mark pressed his fingers to his eyes. "Mom, the bank, the taxes. You don't understand how complicated. You mistake complication for excuse," I said, not unkindly. "If the bank requires truth to be untidy, then untidy it will be." His shoulders twitched, tears he wouldn't let fall. "I'm trying to keep peace." Peace without justice is just quiet, I replied, and even quiet can be cruel. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the house had folded itself into evening, a new knock came, single, heavy, official. Mark opened to a courier with a manila envelope and a practiced expression of neutrality. He signed. I stood in the hallway like an old tree watching a storm roll over the field, unable to stop the wind but unwilling to bow. He slit the envelope, paper side out. Notice of caution filed, he read, tone flattened by shock. Transfer restricted pending claim. His eyes found mine. You did this. I protected myself, I said. My voice was soft. It didn't need to be loud. The paper spoke for me. Lena moved like a spark struck flint. You're sabotaging us, she hissed. Do you want to ruin your son's life, his credit? Do you want strangers to think we're thieves? I tilted my head. I don't need strangers to think anything. I need the truth to stand where it belongs. She stepped closer, too close, and whispered so only I could hear. You will end up alone. I felt the old loneliness rear, a familiar dark wave. Then Sophie's laughter drifted faintly from the bathroom, high and bright, and the wave broke on a rock I had forgotten was mine. I have been alone before, I said. It didn't kill me. It taught me to listen to my own voice. They went to bed in a clatter of muted fury. I stayed at the table with my notebook. Evening, 2041. Courier delivered registry notice. Mark read aloud. Lena threatened isolation. I closed the cover and placed my palm over it, the way mothers do when checking a sleeping child's breath. The house was very still. Even the clock seemed to tick again with its old confidence. I made tea in the quiet and took it to the window. Outside, a cat crossed the street like a shadow that had decided to become an animal. Across the way, Mrs. Alvarez watered her geraniums under a porch lamp. The spray made a sound like rain remembered. She looked up, saw me, and raised her hand. I raised mine back. It is a small thing to be seen by another woman at night. Small things I am learning can be seeds. Just before I slept, I opened the drawer where I keep my husband's photograph, the one with the soft crease from years of being moved from one safe place to another. We are not for sale, I told him. I slid the picture under my pillow like a prayer. At dawn, a message slipped under my door. No knock, no voice, just paper scratching wood. I bent, knees complaining, and picked it up. The handwriting was Mark's. Grown man neat, but still the boy I taught to make the tales of his wise long as fish. Mom, meet me at the cafe at noon. Alone. My heart did the old foolish thing and leapt. Noon is a bright hour. Secrets prefer corners. I pressed the note flat, smoothed its edges, and heard the house wake around me. Lena's steps, Sophie humming, the kettle beginning to murmur. I folded the paper into my pocket, patted it once, and told my bones to be ready. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and warm bread, a smell that clung to memory as much as it did to air. I arrived 10 minutes early, my cane clicking against the pavement, the note from Mark folded in my pocket like a fragile truce. Noon light spilled across the tables, and I chose one by the window, where I could watch both the door and the street. My reflection in the glass looked older than I felt, lines deepened by battles fought in silence. Still there was fire in my eyes. Mark entered, shoulders hunched, eyes darting as though he were guilty just for walking. He spotted me and came over quickly, sliding into the chair across from me. No Lena. That alone felt like a shift in gravity. He leaned forward, voice low. Mom, thank you for coming. I didn't want to talk at the house. Too many ears. His hands fidgeted with the sugar packet, tearing it open and spilling crystals on the table. Then talk, I said softly. He sighed, heavy, as though every word cost him. Lena, she's pushing hard. The listing, the papers, everything. She says we need to sell. Debts, school fees, the mortgage. It's all piling up. She told me it's the only way. He rubbed his eyes. And she said you'd be taken care of. But I know. He trailed off. You know it's not true, I finished. My voice carried no anger, only a tired certainty. Taken care of means pushed aside, forgotten. I left everything for you, Mark. My jewelry, my savings, my years. And now you hand me words like complicated, as if they make betrayal softer. His eyes glistened. Mom, I didn't want this. I thought putting the house in my name was just a formality. Lena said it would make things easier, that you'd always be with us anyway. I didn't see how much it erased you. He looked down ashamed. But now it's gone too far. I can't stop her. She won't listen to me. I leaned forward, placing my hand on his restless ones. Then you must decide, Mark. Are you her husband first or my son still? One does not erase the other, but one will define who you are. His lips trembled, and for a moment I saw the boy he had been, the boy who once promised me he'd give back everything I gave. I'm scared, he whispered. So am I said. But courage is not the absence of fear, Mark. It's standing while your knees shake, and I've stood for you all my life. We sat in silence, the hum of the cafe wrapping around us. Finally, he pulled a small envelope from his pocket and slid it across the table. These are copies of some papers Lena didn't want you to see. Bank accounts, transactions. I don't know what they prove, but maybe they'll help you. His eyes flicked nervously toward the door. I can't keep them at home. She'll find them. I slipped the envelope into my handbag without opening it. Thank you, I said simply. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. Before we could say more, the cafe door opened, and Lena's figure appeared, sharp as a knife. Her eyes scanned the room, locked onto us, and her steps grew quick, furious. So this is where you are, she hissed, arriving at the table. Conspiring. Her voice turned heads, but she didn't care. You think you can hide things from me, Mark? From me? Mark shrank back, shame written across his face. I remained calm. We were talking, I said evenly. Something families do when there is still family left. Her glare could have burned holes. You're poisoning him against me. No, I replied, my voice steady as stone. Truth poisons lies by existing, that is all. She grabbed Mark's arm. We're leaving. But Mark didn't move. His hand trembled, but he stayed seated. Not yet, he said quietly. For the first time in years, he defied her openly. Her face twisted, a mask cracking. She turned to me, venom in her tone. You think you've won? You're an old woman clinging to scraps of paper. In the end, nobody will believe you. I smiled faintly, though my heart was racing. We'll let the law decide. Her grip tightened on Mark's sleeve, but he pulled away gently. Go home, Lena, he said. I'll be there later. She stared at him as though the earth had shifted beneath her. Then with a sharp turn, she stormed out, leaving the smell of her perfume and fury in her wake. When she was gone, Mark slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. God help me, he whispered. I touched his shoulder. No, Mark, God help us both, but we must help ourselves first. I left the cafe with my cane tapping like a drum beat, my bag heavier with the envelope, my heart heavier still with what it might reveal. Outside, the sky was split with gray and light, storm and sun wrestling above. I thought of Sophie, of her paper Saturn with its fragile rings, and I swore silently I would not let her orbit around lies. That night, alone in my room, I opened the envelope. Inside were bank slips, transfers, signatures that weren't Mark's, but Lena's. Money moved from accounts I didn't know existed, some under Mark's name, others under hers, and one line that froze my blood. Loan secured against property, Willow Street. I pressed the paper to my chest, my breath shaking. They hadn't just erased me, they had mortgaged my life, my husband's life, my sacrifices, and they did it behind my back. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. I did not sleep that night. The papers lay open on the blanket beside me, their numbers and signatures glowing faintly in the moonlight like silent witnesses. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my husband's face, the way he used to polish his boots on Sundays, the way he used to hum while fixing a squeaky hinge. He had left me strength and a little savings, not so his son's wife could gamble them into debts. I thought of Sophie too, her laugh, her bright drawings taped on the fridge. What would happen to her if everything collapsed? Children do not live on love alone. They need stability, a roof that doesn't shake under storms. By dawn, I had made my decision. The time for whispered warnings was over. The time for official voices had come. After breakfast, while Lena clattered dishes in cold silence, and Mark sat hunched over his coffee, I walked to the hallway, put on my scarf and coat, and said, "I'm going out." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Again?" she asked. "Where?" I looked at her calmly. "To remember who I am." The lawyer's office was warm, crowded with files and the faint smell of old ink. I spread the new documents on his desk, the transfers, the mortgage slip, Lena's signature bold where it had no right to be. He studied them with quiet intensity, flipping each page, marking notes in the margins. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Thompson, this is serious. If these loans were secured without your consent, and if your contributions were used as collateral, it strengthens your position. It also exposes your daughter-in-law to potential fraud charges." The word fraud hung in the air like a bell tolling. He leaned forward. "I recommend two things. We file immediately to freeze any property sale, and we open a fraud investigation. This will not be pleasant. It may fracture your family further." His voice softened. "But you deserve justice, and your granddaughter deserves the truth." My hands trembled, but not from fear, from the weight of choice. To expose Lena was to burn what little bridge remained. But hadn't she already burned it? Hadn't she salted the earth with her lies? I straightened. "Do it," I said. "Let the truth breathe." When I returned home, the air was heavy with tension. Mark was in the living room, his head in his hands. Lena stood at the window, arms crossed. She turned sharply when she saw me. "Where have you been?" she demanded. I set my cane against the wall and removed my scarf with deliberate calm. "At the lawyer's." The silence that followed was like thunder waiting to crack. Lena's face blanched, then hardened. "You wouldn't dare," she spat. I met her gaze. I already did. Mark's head shot up, panic in his eyes. "Mom, what did you do?" "What you should have done," I answered. "I protected what was mine, and yours. I filed to freeze the sale, and I brought the papers. Lena, your papers." I laid them on the table. Her name gleamed on the lines of debt like a brand she couldn't wash away. Lena lunged forward, snatching at the documents, but I held them firm. "Copies are already with the lawyer and the registry," I said quietly. "Tearing these won't erase the truth." Her mask cracked then. The calm, polished woman shattered into something raw, desperate. "Do you want us ruined?" she hissed. "Do you want your son destroyed?" I turned to Mark. "No, Lena, it was never me who wanted him destroyed. It was you, with your secrets and your lies. You used my sacrifice like currency in a game I never agreed to play." Mark stood pacing, hands tangled in his hair. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice breaking. "The loans, the mortgage, without telling me?" Lena's silence was louder than any confession. Her lips pressed thin, her eyes darting. Finally she snapped, "I did what I had to do. You're too soft, Mark. Someone has to think of the future." "The future?" I said sharply. "You gamble the past, you erase the present, and you dare to call it a future?" My cane tapped the floor with each word. "I will not be erased for your comfort." Mark collapsed into a chair, staring at the floor. "God, what have we done?" he whispered. Sophie peeked in from the hallway, sensing the storm. "Grandma," she said softly. I forced a smile for her. "It's all right, my son. The storm is loud, but storms always pass." That night, Lena packed a small bag, slamming drawers and muttering curses under her breath. Mark didn't stop her. She left with the door banging behind her, perfume trailing like smoke after fire. The house was suddenly too quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a scream. Mark sat across from me, eyes red. "Mom, I don't know how to fix this." I reached across the table and took his hand, just as I had when he was small. "We don't fix lies, Mark. We tell the truth and we carry it. That is how we begin." The next morning, a letter arrived, official, stamped. The fraud investigation had begun. I held it in my hands, the paper heavy with promise. It was not victory yet, but it was the first step toward it. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, not because the battle was over, but because I was finally fighting it with the truth at my side. And as I looked at Sophie playing with her crayons on the carpet, I thought, this is why. Not for revenge, not even for myself, but so she grows up knowing her grandmother was not useless. She was unbroken. The house felt different the morning after the official letter arrived. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was watchful, as if even the walls knew that something had shifted forever. I placed the stamped envelope on the table where the morning light touched it, and for the first time in years, I let myself breathe without clutching my chest in fear of being forgotten. Mark moved slowly that day, carrying his shame like a sack too heavy to set down. He hovered around me, eyes swollen, words caught in his throat. Every now and then he tried, "Mom, or if only I had," but nothing reached the end of a sentence. I didn't push him. Silence, I had learned, was sometimes the only honest language between us. By noon, Lena returned. She came not with her usual confidence, but with fury sharpened to a knife. Her hair was pulled too tight, her coat hanging awkwardly as if even the fabric resisted her. She stormed into the kitchen where I sat with Sophie, and the child's little hands froze mid-crayon stroke. "Are you proud of yourself?" Lena spat. "You've dragged this family's name into the dirt. Fraud, investigations. Do you think the neighbors won't talk? Do you think Sophie won't suffer?" I stood slowly, my cane steady against the tile. "Sophie suffers already," I said, "when her parents teach her lies instead of love." My voice was calm, but every syllable carried the years of sacrifice that burned inside me. Mark appeared in the doorway, pale and weary. Lena, stop, he said softly. It's true. You hid the debts from me. You mortgaged the house without asking. Mom only did what I should have done. His words cracked, fragile as glass, but they were his. Lena turned on him, her eyes wild. You're siding with her? After everything I've done for us? For us? Mark's voice rose, years of silence breaking. Or for yourself? You didn't just erase my mother. You erased me. You made me sign papers I didn't understand, told me it was for the best. But the best for who, Lena? Not for Sophie. Not for me. And certainly not for the woman who gave me everything. Lena's face twisted, and for a moment I thought she would strike. But then something inside her seemed to collapse. She grabbed her coat, muttering curses under her breath, and fled the house. The door slammed so hard a frame rattled from the wall. Sophie jumped, then ran into my arms. I held her close, whispering, "It's all right, my son. Some storms are loudest just before they end." That evening, the three of us, Mark, Sophie, and I, sat together in the living room. No television, no distractions. Just the ticking of the clock and the warmth of a lamp. Mark stared at his hands. "I failed you, Mom," he whispered. His voice was raw. "You trusted me, and I let her turn me against you. You gave me everything, and I let you believe you were useless." Tears filled my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "You failed, yes, but failure is not forever. What matters is whether you rise again with truth in your hands. You are still my son. That cannot be erased by signatures or silence." He looked at me then, really looked, the way he hadn't in years. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. I reached for his hand, rough and trembling. "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness is the only inheritance worth leaving." In the days that followed, the investigation unfolded. Officials came, asked questions, copied documents. Lena's name appeared where it shouldn't, her lies unfolding like a rotten fabric. Neighbors whispered, yes, but not about me. They whispered about her, the woman who tried to erase an old mother and ended up exposing her own deceit. One afternoon, as the last of the officials left, I sat in the garden with Sophie. The geraniums I had tended for years stood bright and stubborn in their clay pots. Sophie leaned against me, her little hand tucked into mine. "Grandma," she said, "does this mean we get to stay here forever?" I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. "Forever is a big word, my son. But yes, it means this home is safe, and so are we." She giggled, resting her head on my shoulder. "You're not useless, Grandma. You're my hero." That night, I took out my husband's photograph, the one that had traveled with me through every battle, and placed it on the mantel. "We did it," I whispered to him. "They tried to erase me, but I am still here. And she will know, the little one will know, that her grandmother was not useless." The clock ticked steadily, the house breathing easier, and for the first time in years, I felt peace curl gently around me like a shawl. Did you like my story? From which city are you watching? Write it in the comments. I would love to know. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you can hear more stories like mine. Your support means the world to me.